Hello, my name is Crystal Petrie, and you are watching another episode of the Crystal Petrie Podcast, Season 3. On this episode, it's where leadership meets humanity. In a world where 82% of managers stumble into leadership without guidance, yeah, you heard that number correct. 82% of leaders are accidental managers. We are here to change that. Join us as we unpack how to truly see, support, and lead people, not just manage them. Because in business, people aren't the most important thing, they are everything. And here to help lead our managers and me and you, we have Olu Burrell. Welcome to the podcast, Olu.
Thank you so much for having me, Crystal. I really appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So where in the world are you?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I would have answered this question differently about 15 months ago. But right now I found myself as a new adopted Hoosier in Indianapolis, Indiana in the Midwest.
All right. Let's go Connecticut. That's the wrong state. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about Paige Beckers. I'm thinking about WNBA. Sorry, folks. Actually, I'm not sorry because I love the WNBA. But Olu, let me just first shout out to your mom and your dad for your amazing name. I love your first name, Olu.
Yeah. It's actually short for Olu Tosin. It is Yoruba, Nigerian in origin. And even though my parents, neither one of them are, they were Christian missionaries. And they named myself and my 7 siblings names from different African countries. So Olu Tosin means God is worthy of praise. And I've found that my life has fallen in alignment with that meaning of my name my entire life. So I'm grateful for the name as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so Olu Tosin, I'm going to try and say your whole name during this podcast. Okay. What does it mean what does it mean to be a people matter expert in today's world? I got that out.
No, absolutely. No, I appreciate it. Listen, you're going to see some stumbles from me throughout this. I just want to set the record straight. You're good to go.
Thank you.
Well, absolutely. So one of the things that I recognize, even in this little brief exchange, right, I realized moving along in my leadership journey that there comes a point where it no longer serves you to be a subject matter expert, because the more you move up into leadership, the less and less important it is that you're an expert in doing the thing. Right. And so instead, you need to learn to develop expertise in leading people who do the thing. And so for me, that meant coming up with a new phrase. So instead of subject matter expert, I started to call myself a people matter expert, and it started to stick. And so I'm grateful for that.
How can leaders ensure that people feel value beyond productivity, beyond meeting the numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to hear this a lot from me. So I just want to temper everybody. I have a book, a quote, a TED Talk, a reference for almost everything. So don't be surprised. There's a book called Bring Your Human to Work that I want to reference that. And I think one of the missteps that a lot of leaders make is they start to see their persons who work on their team, their teammates, their team members, as being measured their value based upon how productive they are, as opposed to understanding that we are all human beings, and if we allow ourselves to be human becomings. And so if we start to nurture and see that as a value, then we can be more effective as leaders in making sure that we nurture the whole person who comes to work, who spends half of their waking hours, half of our adult lives are spent at work. And so, if you treat someone as a cog in a wheel, you can't be surprised if they burn out or break down and they have no desire to continue working for you. But if instead you focus on treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve as human beings and human becomings, you'll get a lot more out of them than just productivity. You'll get something a little bit more familiar and familial, possibly.
And the numbers are out there, Olu, that People spend more time at work than they do at home. So there needs to be the respect there. There needs to be the honor there, just like you stated. Now, this is something that we see all over social media, this comparison. And I have you here, Olu Toussaint, the expert matter. What is the difference between managing people and
Yeah,
leading people?
absolutely. To be clear, they're both important. They find
Okay.
themselves on both ends of a spectrum of a polarity, if you will. So management is needed in order to provide structure, to provide predictability, to provide a sense of knowing to the degree possible. Whereas leaders are necessary to chart the vision, to communicate that vision, and to make sure that they are able to be as clear as possible with what their expectations are. And they are the dreamers who rely on management as the doers and executors. And you need both of them to be effective in leadership and management.
So there's not a competition because when I see it on social media, and maybe I'm interpreting it incorrectly, I see it as like it's framed like it's a competition. Like, are you a manager? Are you a leader? Even
Yeah,
in the football world, and I don't know if you follow sports,
I
but
do.
Cam Newton, several months ago made this huge splash about saying that some quarterbacks are, managers and some quarterbacks are leaders,
Yeah,
but you need both to be successful.
you absolutely do. And I think another misnomer is that those things are in competition, right? And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that we rely on as humans when we say, again, management provides certainty, right? And that
Yes.
certainty lens makes everybody see everything in a black or white dynamic, like it's an either or. But the what I like to entreat people to do and consider is to see things as a both and, because they're not in competition, they're in cooperation and collaboration. And I think that is what the pinnacle of any kind of leadership needs, which is you need the efficiency, the stability, and the structure that management provides. And you also need the visionary, the dreamer, the casting of the vision and the communication of that vision that leadership provides. And they don't have to be at odds. They can be and they can work in tandem. And I think people situate them as but you can't have one without. Come on, the gray. We live in the gray. Let's focus on the gray.
Yes. So, okay, we've been talking for 7 minutes and 51 seconds. We've learned that a manager and a leader, you need both. We are not in competition with each other with that. How important, this is me assuming,
Yeah.
how important is emotional intelligence with leaders and leadership?
Uh, it is the entire ball game. Emotional intelligence, right? Daniel Goleman, who is oftentimes he's like the father of emotional intelligence. His book kind of revolutionized the way in which we talked about emotional intelligence. Him and Richard Boyatzis, and one of the things that he talks about is who you are is how you lead. And so emotional intelligence, like you can't exceed the competency that you have when it comes to how you lead people. And if you are not a person who has sought to be curious and intentional about leaning into self-awareness, which is 1/4 of the quadrants that emotional intelligence requires, then self-regulation or self-control, then social awareness, and then lastly, relationship management. Those are the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence. And if you've ever found yourself arguing with anyone on social media, not to say that I ever have, but let's just say that I have.
Most people
You
have. I have
know,
not, but most people have.
exactly. People are like, I'm very self-aware. And it's like, well, that's the third. I mean, sorry, that's the fourth. That's what. But do you have self-control? Obviously, from your remark, you don't.
Yeah.
Do you have social awareness, understanding your impact on others? You obviously don't. And relationship management, have you displayed that you are also adept in managing those relationships and understanding that two things can be correct at the same time,
Duality.
and the duality. And I'll for just to kind of prove the thing I said before, I have a quote for everything. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby, once said, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to weigh or consider two things at the same time that are without being, sorry, let me back up. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to wield two seemingly opposed things at the same time while retaining the ability to function. For instance, one might think that things are hopeless and still be determined to make them not so. And so absorbing, creating, observing, and validating the duality is what we need in order to be important. Sorry, to lean into our emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. No apologies. I started the podcast with flubs. No apologies. How important, or maybe not important, is empathy when it comes to leadership? I feel like it's overlooked a lot of the times. I feel like it's not used hardly at all, if any, when we have leaders in that position.
Yeah. So one of the things I like in answering that question is, well, to answer it first and foremost succinctly, empathy is incredibly important when you lead, right? The late, great Maya Angelou once said, people will forget what you said, people forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel, right?
Absolutely.
And so empathy is the ability to say, I recognize the human in you, and there's also humanity in me. And I can understand where you're coming from based upon that, right? There's a word called sonder, which is spelled like wonder, but with an S, and it comes from a book, interesting title, called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And sonder is defined as the ability to recognize that every human being that you encounter is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, and that you might be a main character, a minor character, a stranger, or non-existent in other people's lived experience. And so empathy is to say, you know what, Crystal, and I would never say this about you, but Crystal gets on my nerves every time we're at work. She doesn't exist to get on my nerves. There might be something in her that chafes against something in me. But if I lean into empathy, I can say, if I consider that she's a three-dimensional person, then maybe I need to examine what within me is triggered by what or how she's presenting, and give myself some empathy and also give some empathy to her, so that we can let our human beings, instead of coming and clashing, to figure out where can we find common ground. And so I think that's what empathy allows us to do.
Now, Olu, I know we're talking about empathy and leadership. I was having this conversation with someone a couple days ago about empathy with driving. We did not use the word empathy, but since you so eloquently explained it, I see how it tracks. As a driver, and me and this person had this in common, as a driver, when people, and I'm not 100% on this, I'm not perfect on this, but if people like cut me off or pull in or whatever the case is, we've all been driving here, hopefully. I never lean in with anger first. I always lean in with, they must be late somewhere. Maybe someone is sick. Maybe they're on the phone and they're just not paying attention, which is not okay, but it's the world that we live in. So I always lead in with empathy that maybe something else is going on in their life, and that's just the result of it. It's not that, maybe they're a bad driver or they don't like me, and they decided to cut me off on the highway. Something else is probably going on in their world. So when you explained it like that, I was like, that's exactly what we were talking about. We just didn't have the verbiage for it.
Yeah. And I just want to commend you on that, because I would say that that is a superhuman assumption that you sit in, because our natural tendency is not to give that consideration. Right.
Yes.
And we know that our brains are not wired for us to thrive, which gives us access to empathy in the way in which you described it, but it's wired to survive. And so our initial natural reaction is, this is danger. Danger is meant to harm me. This person means to harm me. That's the very quick conclusion that our brains come to. But when we learn, again, to practice empathy, which is not an easy thing to do,
correct,
then we can create those stories, as you so eloquently shared, and say, you know what, they must be late. They have something. I wish them well on wherever it is they need to go. I don't need to get to where I need to get that fast. I hope they arrive there safely. And that is what it means to rise above our natural inclination to see those people perhaps as a threat.
Now let's talk about this number that you gave me when we first spoke.
Yeah.
This 82%, I was blown away. And like I've been talking about it since, I've been thinking about it since we spoke.
Yeah.
82% of people are accidental managers.
Yes.
Please explain that. How does this even happen?
Well, the way in which it happens is because we do not we do not have systems of intentional promotion of talent that are evident across the board. And
Mhm.
so what happens is people show or display that they are good at the thing, whatever the thing is. Remember, we talk
Right.
about subject matter expert. Oh, you're really good at doing this. As you've shown over and over again that you're good at doing this, the bright idea says, let's put you in charge of other people who do that thing so that they can do those things the way that you do those things. And then, but that happens, they get promoted. Again, 82% of them get promoted. And now, if they're not clearly told that their new method of evaluation and performance evaluation is now I'm going to gauge how well you lead people who do the thing, you will have these accidental managers who said, well, my reward for doing the thing well was being promoted. So I need to continue to do the thing well. And so that's why with these accidental managers, we have a lot of high performers who suffer under these accidental managers because now they're stepping in to do my job, or maybe they don't step in, but they step in to do the jobs of perhaps lower performers. And me and my lower performer colleague are getting paid the same amount. But my boss, who's an accidental manager, is doing your job for you. So why should I show up and continue to bust my hump to show up in the way in which you do? And so with accidental managers, it's this this idea that since you do the thing well, you're a subject matter expert, let's put you in charge of other subject matter experts without giving you the learning and development infrastructure that enables you to effectively lead and manage people instead of the thing or the project or the process. And so I think that's where that number comes from.
And a lot of times the subject matter expert is not, and it's not to say that you cannot be taught and you cannot learn, but
Yeah.
in the immediate promotion, the
Yeah.
subject matter expert is not the people matter expert. They don't know how to lead. They just know how to do this thing very well. And
Yeah.
that causes the tension, the mistakes, and everything else that we see that people share online.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's where you get a lot of disgruntled employees who say, you know what, I might go out and, have a beer with this person. I think they're cool, but they're a horrible manager.
Yes.
Right. And when you don't solve for that by investing leadership development, coaching, anything of the like into those accidental managers, what you have is you'll have a lot of attrition. And if you don't ask the proper questions, you'll just say, oh, these people just couldn't cut it. It's like, no. It may not be that they couldn't cut it. It's just that they were under poor management or poor leadership.
And that goes back to the empathy part, right? Am I connecting this correctly?
Yes, you are. Absolutely. Because when you think about it, if I am rewarded, if I have a lack of empathy or lack of emotional intelligence in that regard, and I'm rewarded for doing the thing, and I'm now put in charge of these other people who might have been my former colleagues, or perhaps they put some people under me, then I'm looking down at these people like, well, I got promoted because I obviously do this thing well. You need to listen to me. And with a lack of empathy, I might use an iron fist without a velvet glove, so to speak, in a way that drives people away from me instead of bringing them close.
Yes. And just to add to that, then I'm gonna go to my next question.
Absolutely.
The leader or the executive director of that manager could see that, they are reigning with an iron fist. The attrition is very high under this new manager, but you have not given them the tools to manage.
Yes.
So now you fire them because they were never taught how to be a manager. They have always been the subject matter expert.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's really just a cynical cycle.
It is. And I love the way that you said that. Hashtag cynical cycle. That is like that trend. But no, you're absolutely right. Because one of the very first questions that I ask whenever I'm doing any type of change management or organization development work is my favorite question is, do we have the problem that we think we have? Right? Because then that forces you to say, all right, let's pull the data, whether that's through survey, focus group, one-on-one conversations, or just observation to say, do we have the problem we think we have? Oh, bring these people in because you know what? My leaders just aren't leading the way that I need them to. And it's just like, okay, well, what type of resources have they been afforded now that they're put in this leadership? Well, I just thought because they did the thing real well that, they can show other people how to do the thing. Well, are they good with people? Do they need to be?
Right.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say, and you can work on that. You can develop that. You can. And when you fall short of that, then that can cost you in the long run. And it's really, really, trust is a very fragile thing. Mm-hmm. And if you don't work hard to build it up as strongly as possible, then you can find yourself having to rebuild it, which can be a much taller task.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see accidental managers make, especially early on in the promotion?
Yeah. I think they lean more into judgment than they do curiosity. And what I mean by that is there's a sense of, again, that duality, that black or white thinking, right? That either or. I was rewarded because I did things this way. Therefore, I need to ensure that people are doing the thing the way that I did it, right? Without allowing for the opportunity to recognize, like, hey, if we're all trying to get to the summit of this mountain, does that mean we have to go up the same side of the mountain in the same way? And that answer for anyone would be like, no, of course not. But if you are managing or leading from a place of my way or the highway, or this is the appropriate way, or I don't understand, again, that's the lens of judgment that says, I don't see it. Curiosity says, I don't see it, but I'd like to. Can you explain it to me a little differently or show me what your thoughts were about it? And so leaning into curiosity is one of the biggest opportunities that people have, but they don't have it. They oftentimes don't use it. I remember reading this article in October of 2022. Don't ask me why I remember. It was Harvard Business School. And I think it was entitled the number one skill that people want from leaders. And it was where they looked at 5,000 job descriptions on C-suite leaders up to CEO across the country, looked at job postings and positions. And the number one skill that they wanted across the board was they wanted a good listener.
Wow.
A good listener.
Wow.
What does it mean to be a good listener? You got to be able to hear, allow people to know that they've been heard, practice empathy, active listening, repeating back, not discounting what people are saying. And you also try to figure out how to synthesize that and how you lead. And if that's the number one skill that people want globally is a good listener, then that means you have to be willing to, one, practice intellectual humility in understanding I don't know everything, but if I'm curious, maybe I can be in a position to learn the things. Or as Satya Nadella once said, we need to move from being a know-it-all to a learn-it-all.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay, so this is a two-part question. Certainly. What can companies do, or leaders, our C-suite leaders, our executive directors do to better help our accident managers become less subject matter experts and more, to use your words, people matter experts? Is my first question. And should they do the thing before they promote the person to become the manager, or should they do it after they become the manager?
That is an excellent two-part question. And I have a two-part answer. So to answer the first part of your question, the number one thing that helps people in any change or any leadership thing is for leaders to walk the walk. That is the number one thing people can do. And so these leaders, these executive directors, C-suite, CEOs, presidents, and the like, they need to model the behavior they want to see more of if they want other people to do it. It can't be one of those things that most of our parents grew up saying, do as I say, not as I do. No, they have to model it, right? They have to model it first. And now one of the things, to answer your second part, should they do it before or after? I think they need to do it continuously. And if they find themselves like listening to this podcast, hey, well, I've already promoted them. Well, you can always start today. And here's the thing that's going to feel risky. Part of what it means for you to do that as a leader is you have to be vulnerable. You have to be. And that doesn't mean you spill your life story, you spill your guts on your deepest, darkest fear or apprehension. But what it does mean is being willing to be human, to say, you know what, I don't get it right all the time. And here's what happens when I get frustrated. Here's what I do when I get mad. Because the more you model that, the more you create the conditions where people say, it's okay to not be perfect here. And if it's okay for, I see my leader not being perfect and still being effective, then I can be not perfect and still be effective. And then I can make sure the people who report to me can also feel the same way. Now, I can say things till I'm blue in the face, but if I don't show up in that way, if I don't practice empathy, when somebody makes a mistake, if I don't have a healthy rapport and healthy relationship with failure and mistakes and risk, to the point where I can say, you know what, we got to treat this like a scientist treats it. This is a failure, but it's data. It doesn't mean that I'm a poor scientist and the experiment didn't work. This is data. So what have I learned and what can I do differently next time? You show you're doing that as a leader, your managers are going to be like, oh, it's okay to do that. And then that trickles down because they see it, they experience it. And that's one of the best opportunities that leaders have.
Oh, Lou, could you imagine if these leaders started thinking like that? That's not a failure. That's data. Could you imagine how the Googles, the Apple corporations, and I'm not saying that they don't think that way. Maybe they do. But these huge corporations down to your mom and pop shops.
Yes.
The work environment would just be, oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a definite aha moment for me. A definite aha moment. Okay, so what are some things or some telltale signs that leaders should look for or pay attention to determine if their managers need coaching and development?
Yeah. So one of the telltale signs that you can look at without an indirect telltale sign is to go to your HR department and to look to see what the leave schedule looks like for the people on their team. Because there are two data points that are completely the opposite of each other that mean the same thing. If people always take leave or if they never take leave, there's a problem. There's a problem. If they always take leave, they don't want to be there because it's a toxic environment. If they never take leave, they feel like they can't afford to not be there because it's not safe to not be there because other people won't be able to step in and fill in the gap. And so that's one way that you can do to look at data besides having a direct conversation. But and I think that's something that people should do, right? And the other thing that they should do, an opportunity to kind of look at that is to do touch bases with those managers. And there's a 3-question quick check-in, tabletop 5-minute check-in that I love for people to model. And the 3 questions are, number 1, how's it going? Number 2, where are you getting stuck? Number 3, what might you do differently? That's it. How's it going? Where are you getting stuck? What might you do differently? If you notice, those are coaching questions because they're all open-ended. I'm not telling people what to do, but I'm allowing them to get their thoughts out of their heads because oftentimes things make sense as the longer they stay in our head. Like we're like, oh, we can't do that because, and we'll have all these excuses. But when we say it out loud, sometimes I know you've probably been in witness somebody start to say something like, wait a minute, no, I don't like that. Let me work on that. Like, yeah, but they were convinced about that for as long as it stayed in their head. So giving people the gift of an audience and then say, well, might you do differently? That's empowering, right? How might I empower you? Well, maybe we could do things differently than the way that I've traditionally done them. Okay, cool. So what will success look like, in your estimation? And it's coaching. It's open-ended. It's curious. It's not judgment. Oh, what do you mean it didn't work? You're not doing any of that. You're doing the types of questioning that invites people to share more. And then you can also, if you feel so inclined, you can speak to their direct reports. I know for some people, they're like, well, chain of command, that might make people feel a certain way if you go around them to talk to their direct reports. And while I do appreciate that, and I think that that is valid, I also think that if you create the conditions, and you have to start from somewhere, where you're creating an empathetic and trust environment, you have to start doing those behaviors that might be a little bit different than you're used to. And it might make you feel uncomfortable in the beginning, and it might make others feel uncomfortable. But if you are operating in good faith, then over time, people can say, at first, I didn't like the fact that he went around me or she went around me to talk to my direct reports. I'm like, why don't you trust me? But I realize that they're doing it because one of the values that they have is they want to make sure that everybody within their purview feels valued, feels seen, feels heard, feels validated, and feels empowered to do what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And so creating those lines of communication where it's open, again, if I model vulnerability, if I model empathy, if I model, I don't know everything, I'm intellectually humble, but I want to figure out how can we get to the best answer or the best way forward, and it doesn't have to necessarily be my idea, then you create the conditions where people feel more comfortable being vulnerable, being empathetic, like you get more from that. And that's one of the greatest gifts of leadership that is tragically underutilized.
Staying in that same lane, Olu, how can we destigmatize leaders and managers asking for help without feeling like it's going to blow up in their face?
Okay. So I'm looking directly in the camera.
Yes.
Because somebody heard you ask that question and responded, yeah, since you got all the answers, Mr. Man, what do you do? I'm not saying that. I'm just having a little fun here, but here's what I say. And this will be hard, acknowledging that. Mm-hmm. The best way to demystify it is by doing the thing that makes you uncomfortable, because you have to be vulnerable. You have to practice it. You have to do the thing before it feels comfortable or safe to do it. One of the, I got a quote for everything. Like I said, Bob Anderson, who is not only the co-author of Scaling Leadership and Mastering Leadership, along with Bill Adams, they're also the creators of the Leadership Circle Profile 360, Collective Leadership Assessment, Leadership System, and several other instruments. One of the things he says is there's no safe way to be great. Mm-hmm. Right. And I love that quote because it's like, there's no safe way. Like, if you want to be a great at anything, you won't be safe. And so the demystification is oftentimes an excuse for us to say, well, if it feels hard to do, maybe I shouldn't do it. Well, that's exactly why you should do it. It's hard. It's not common. It is rare. And so one of the things that you need to do to demystify it is do the thing afraid anyway. You demystify it, even if people look at you and say, well, I need to ask for help. And people don't usually ask for help.
Right.
And it doesn't feel safe to ask for help. Well, the only way that you can do that is just by doing it. And even if you need to provide the context as to why you want to ask for help, to make it a little bit more safe for you, I'll give you an example. You can say, you can do it with a qualifier first. I'll say something like, you know what? It's my intention to do this well. And it's my intention to do this right. With that being said, do you mind if I ask you some questions that could provide me with clarity to make sure that I'm able to do this well and right, with the assistance of your wisdom and your know-how? Would you be amenable to that? I'm asking for help. I'm telling you why. I'm saying it. My outcome, it's outcome derived. I want to do this well. Who's going to say, I can't believe you asked me any questions. What do you mean you want to do it right? No, I just qualified why I was asking for help, leading with my intention, letting you know I don't mind asking for help, and hopefully creating a better bond and a reciprocal relationship with whoever my leader is to say, I'm asking for help because I understand it is more important for us to get this right than for me to sit back on my ego and say, well, I don't want people to see that I don't have the answers. You don't have all the answers, Sway. You don't. None of us do.
Yes. Listen, Olu, that was some corporate talk if I ever heard it.
I mean, I can do it all day
I
if you
love
need
it.
me to, but you know, there's some utility in it, right? There's a
There
little bit.
is. There absolutely is. So, Olu Tucson, did I get that right?
It's Tocine, but it's okay.
Tocine.
Olu Tocine, yes,
Olu, it's not okay. I'm gonna get it. Olu Tocine. Tell
yes.
us, how did you get into this space of being a coach, of being a mentor, of being a people matter expert?
Absolutely. Well, um, surprise, another quote. Mark Twain once said the two most important days of your life are the day that you were born and the day that you figure out why.
Mhm.
So the date I was born was May 19th, sometime in the late 1900s. And I found out pretty,
I just got that. That's why it was a delay reaction.
yeah, I got a little gray, you got to admit it, right? I earned it. And the day that I figured out why was February 14th, 2011, because it was that day where my whole first name, which you so graciously have been working to pronounce correctly, Olu Tocine, I realized on that day it was a perfect anagram for the word solution. So I could rearrange all the letters in my first name and spell the word solution. Well, as that very popular Michael Jordan meme is, I took that personally. Right? So at the time I was around 30 years old, and I was like, you know what, I need to take a look at my life and figure out what I want to do. And so I started speaking to people in my circle of influence, my spheres of influence, who I know, liked, and trust, and who knew, liked, and trust me. And I said, what is it that I do well or better than perhaps anybody else? Because I really want to operate in my purpose and in my gifting. And one of the things that I was told was, well, Olu, you've always been good with words. I was a performance poet back in undergrad, and I used to, speak in front of groups of people, which I still do now. I just translate that art into some of this science that I've now added to my lexicon. And it was like, you're good with people and you're good with words. You need to figure out how can you bring that together. And so since then, I said, okay. So I found myself playing small a little bit. The next year, my wife and I welcomed our first child in the world, our daughter, who will be 13 at the end of this month, which is hard to remind. But while I held her, that first day when she was born, during the middle of Hurricane Sandy, October 29th, 2012, I looked at her, I was like, man, I'm still playing small. I need to figure out what I need to do with my life. And so while I was out on paternity leave, I started looking up graduate programs. At that point in time, I'd been out of undergrad for about 10 years, and I was like, what do I want to study? And so I decided I wanted to study organization development, which is the people side of business, or people kind of MBA. And so did that program. While I was in my master's program, a couple of my professors said, you know what, Olu, you really have the makings of a great executive coach. You should look into being a coach. And so after that, I said, all right, finished grad school, 2014, 2015, I was enrolled in a 1-year-long comprehensive evidence-based coaching certification program at Fielding Graduate University, where I'm currently enrolled in a PhD program. That's a longer story, where I became a coach. And I guess, since that day, February 14, 2011, learning I'm the solution, I said, all right, how do I operationalize this? How do I put this into practice? Master's degree, 17 certifications, and about a third of the way through a PhD in human development later, here I am today talking to you on your podcast about how I still don't know it all. I'm still working to become the people matter expert that I proclaim to be.
Do you still feel like you're playing small?
In some ways, if I'm honest, yeah. Because I know that I'm, and I hope this is received in the spirit in which it's intended. I know that I could do more. I know that I know that one day I want to be sitting on Oprah's couch on Super Soul Sunday under that big tree on her property. I know that I want, and my wife is poured into me too. And she says, you know, you're meant to be mentioned among the names of the Les Browns and the Willie Jollies and doing more speaking. And I think there's a lot more that I could grow into. And so part of it is overcoming some of the stories that I've told myself that have taken root. And so I'm constantly rewriting those stories in my day-to-day as I move along, and so that I can eventually not play as small as perhaps I find myself playing.
Okay. Well, like I said, I got the right man for the job on this podcast. Absolutely. Let's
I
talk
appreciate that.
about building trust and culture in a
Mm.
work environment. How does trust impact team performance and morale?
Yeah, trust is everything. I'm trying to remember the name. Well, I'll start with one and then go back to the other. So Stephen M.R. Covey, the son of Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. In the book, The Speed of Trust, he said that trust affects two very, very strong levers in business, in companies, which is speed and cost. If you operate in a high trust environment, you operate at high speed, low cost, which is why Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, can do a handshake deal worth billions of dollars, because he has earned trust of the market over the years, the decades that he's been active. But if you operate in a low trust environment, you operate at high cost, low speed, which is why there's some people say, well, I can't get anything done. Maybe I got the wrong people. Well, maybe you don't have the wrong people. Maybe you just haven't earned their trust, right? And I remember, and forgive me, because I like to attribute everybody I can, but the name is slipping my mind right now. But there is a trust framework that I read in Harvard Business Review. The name of the person who wrote the article is slipping my mind right now. But there's 3 components of trust. It's authenticity, logic, and empathy. And you need all 3, right? One, that authenticity. People need to see that you are authentically showing up in who you are, or else they won't trust you. And if you ask them to do something, that ask also has to be logical, because if it makes no sense, they still won't trust you. And then the empathy, which we've been talking about ad nauseum, is if they don't believe that you care about them, then they still won't trust you. So you can be authentic and logical, but if you're not empathetic, you don't have trust. You can be empathetic and logical, but if you're holding something back and not being authentic, you don't have trust. You can be which one did I not do? You can be logical and empathetic. Sorry, I did that already. If you can be logical and authentic, but have no empathy, they won't trust you. You can be empathetic and logical and not be authentic, or you could be first and third, authentic and empathetic, but it makes no sense. And so you need all 3 in order to build that, because that is what's going to make people who are, as we acknowledged earlier, spending the majority of their waking lives at work, saying, listen, I don't want to give my job the best of me and my family and friends the rest of me. Right. And so I need to be able to trust that you are thinking of me, that you are considering me, that you care about what happens to me. And I know people say, oh, that feels all touchy feely. Like, we're humans. We feel first. We feel like, come on, our logic center, our prefrontal cortex, where our human brain of the 3 brains is where we process logic and reasoning. But that's the newest part of our brain. Our oldest part of our brain is our limbic system, also known as the lizard brain. And that's where we get fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And that's the stuff that says, I'm scared. And when we are afraid, when we have no trust, then we experience what's called an amygdala hijack. And when the amygdala hijack happens, our prefrontal cortex goes out the way. You were talking about being in traffic earlier. That's what makes people have road rage, right? Yes. Amygdala hijack, boom, logic and reason is saying, oh, they must be in a rush. That goes out the window. It's like, you trying to kill me. Right? Yes. And then that fight, flight, freeze, and faint comes out. And it's like understanding that's how we are wired, and that our brain still sees threats as a saber-toothed tiger coming around the corner. And we're sitting there as Cro-Magnon man, Australopithecine, with a spear, like, can we survive this thing? And so that's why trust is so incredibly important. And I'll say this quote, and I'll be quiet until your next question. Edward O. Wilson once said, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So just think about it. Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. There's another part of the quote, which I can't recall in this moment. But when you think about what that means, those Paleolithic emotions exist in you and me every day, and we have to try every day to overcome them. And the biggest way of doing that is by trying to establish trust so that those parts of our brains aren't triggered by the lack thereof.
That sounds like a lot. I'm going to be honest. And it sounds like a lot of intentional practice.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. 100%.
So earlier in the conversation, Olu, you were talking about, which is absolutely true, how fragile trust is.
Yeah.
What do leaders and managers do when that fragility of trust is broken? How do you repair it and put it back together again?
Yeah, this is something people aren't going to like either. But the very first thing that you do is you have to acknowledge that trust was broken. Mm-hmm. You have to be vulnerable. You have to say it, because what you're going to do is you're going to encounter the resistance in others. And the resistance says they're never going to admit that they were wrong here. So I'm not listening to a thing they got to say. So the very first thing you have to do as a leader is say, you know what? This was wrong, or this was unfortunate, or this adversely affected in a way that was not our intention. When you acknowledge that, what you do is you satiate the part that is resistant within people, because if they don't believe that you'll do it, you start the process of rebuilding trust by saying something that makes you trustworthy. One of the best ways, well, no, that's a little bit different. But Chris Voss, who is a former FBI hostage negotiator, who wrote a book called Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. He talks about something called an accusation audit. An accusation audit is when you say, I know you think this, I know you think that. And you're saying it in a way to acknowledge that these are the accusations that you might have or you might be holding, that if I do not acknowledge these things, I will never be able to start to rebuild trust with you. But I have to acknowledge that harm was caused, and that harm eroded trust in a way that perhaps was not my intention. Or if it was done by somebody else, perhaps it was their intention. Mm-hmm. But here's how I'm going to show up. I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to be vulnerable. And I hope that in time you will learn to trust me or trust us again. And
you know what? I have a lived experience that you literally just described to a T. When I was working at a traditional job, 8 to 5, I had an executive director. His name was Sean. Real name. His name was Sean. Okay. He called me into his office and did exactly what you just said. He acknowledged that he had been using his silence as a weapon, weaponizing his silence. He apologized for it. He said, from now on, I am going to do better and be better with our relationship. I could not believe it. Of course, he said more things than that, but that was the gist of the conversation.
Yeah.
I could not believe it, Olu, because no one, and of course, I did not have the language, at that time. This was maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago. I did not have the language at that time. But as you were explaining that and rebuilding trust, I was like, that's exactly what Sean did to me. So I went to someone and I was telling them about this meeting and this conversation I had with Sean. And they said, he's getting ready to promote you. And I was like, I couldn't receive that. I just really felt like he was rebuilding and repairing the trust that I felt like he had broken. And evidently he felt the same way.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, Olu, about a month after that conversation, he promoted me.
Wow.
Yes. And he continued to work on our relationship. He continued to restore that trust and that relationship that was once not there. And I will always be very appreciative that he did that, which is why I'm talking about it all these years later. And I remember it all
Yeah.
these years later.
And I was going to ask you, so what are your thoughts towards Sean now? And you just answered that question. And I would argue that part of the reason why is because he did something. One, you, as you can probably acknowledge, how many times have you in your professional experience experienced a leader coming and doing exactly what Sean
Never,
did? It's
never.
so rare and so precious, and that we don't recognize. Like, one of the things that I wish more people would embrace, and I'm also speaking to self, right? Because sometimes I don't embrace it in how I show up. I know I think about it all the time, but I may not always practice it, and so I just want to acknowledge that I'm
Right.
still a work in progress. But we as human beings, we value stories of redemption better than we value stories of perfection. Like,
Yes.
if Sean had never made a mistake with you, you would not have a stronger bond with him than the fact that he made a mistake, owned up to it, and said intentionally he wanted to work on it. Because now, 10 plus years later, you can say, I really appreciate that he did that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the human part of it. That's the
Mhm.
vulnerable part of it. That's empathy. That all that is invaluable, and we don't lean into it not nearly enough.
Wow. I mean, yeah, and it's just bringing, as I'm thinking about it, as I'm learning from you, it's just bringing back the emotion,
Yeah,
the trust, because the trust was rebuilt. And a lot
yeah,
of times people will say, once trust is broken, you can never rebuild it. But that is not true. It's
it's not.
not true. You can absolutely rebuild it. Yeah. And it was a profound moment for me,
Yeah,
working and still to this day. Okay, so let's talk about communication. Communication and
absolutely.
connection, so
Yeah,
important. I feel like communication is just as important as trust. Again, you
yeah,
need both. I feel
yeah.
like you need both to be successful. How can leaders practice active listening, which you stated was the number one thing that people
Yeah.
want at work? How can they practice active listening to strengthen relationships?
Absolutely. And I think, and I appreciate the question, because what I think it requires a nuance and openness to trying new things. So one of the things that when I find myself advising teams and leaders is I'll sit there and I'll say, well, I think one of the quickest ways for you to build trust in how you communicate is by acknowledging the different ways in which people learn and receive information, and then adjusting the way you communicate to them to allow for those differences, to acknowledge those differences, and to validate those differences, even though they're across the spectrum. Like, well, what do you mean? Like, if you're having a team meeting, you have some extroverts who tend to take up all the air, and you have
Mhm.
some introverts who don't really talk much. It can overall, I could say American society, we have a bias towards over-indexing on introverted persons and saying, "Oh, if you spoke up, you must think something." But imagine what it would look like if you said, "I'm going to work to do something like restructuring my team meetings by saying, hey, I want to acknowledge in the beginning of this meeting that I'm going to ask for questions periodically throughout the meeting, understanding that some of you might be introverted, but I don't want your voices to be lost if you need to think to talk, because there's a common saying, extroverts talk to think, which I kind of lean towards. I'm more of an ambivert, but I tend to lean towards extroversion, whereas introverts think to talk while extroverts talk to think. So what you can say is, I'll reserve 10 minutes at the end of each meeting for anyone to bring up anything that was mentioned in the first part of the meeting, even at the end, because I want to make sure I get it. And going a step further, if you can't think of it now, I want to make sure if you have thoughts that come up later on tonight or maybe even tomorrow morning, I just request to get any feedback you might have or suggestions within the next 12 to 24 hours. Would that be okay? You're acknowledging ways in which people communicate and saying that it's okay through how you're modeling it as a leader. Another thing you can say is by acknowledging, hey, if I know some people prefer Slack and some people are on Teams, or some people email or phone or in person, or I might have some satellite team members who might be working remotely. It's about maybe asking them to say, what is the best way for me to acknowledge you? Or what's your best way of receiving this information that makes you feel empowered to do what you need to do? I know some people might be like, okay, Olu, I hear you, but you're asking me to take 5 different approaches towards potentially. It sounds like you give me a lot of work to do. And what I would say to you is, if you want a highly effective, highly performing team, if you want your company or your organization to end up on the Baldrige Performance Award, if you are in the federal government, or best places to work if you are in private industry, these people are doing different things, right? You have to go above and beyond. You have to have a willingness. And Hiram W. Smith, who was Stephen Covey's business partner, has a quote. He says, "Pain is inevitable, misery is optional." Right. And so if you say this will be painful to add all these things or take up much time, I'm like, okay, yeah, it can be painful, but you can't avoid it. We all have it. Or you can be miserable. So we're miserable. Being in misery is a state of choosing a pain you don't have to be. You're just living in it. And so you can live in the pain of not changing. I think that was Jim Rohn. People live in 1 or 2 pains: the pain of changing, or the pain of staying the same. Right? The pain, you won't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. So some people might need to listen to this podcast episode a couple of times in order for you to say, he did say that maybe I have to try. If you really want people to show up for you, that's what's going to happen. And if you want to measure your effectiveness, I'll give you a quick shorthand on how to do that. Start measuring the number of people who start to ask either your direct reports or people in your team, your division, your department, to say, if y'all got any space over there for any new hires? Because that's when the word of mouth gets out. You know what? They started taking the time to listen. They started taking the time to meet me at my learning needs. They started taking the time to acknowledge I need to add some accessibility things to be more inclusive, to be more intentional. And that travels. And that's when trust happens. And then people are like, when's the next time y'all got an opening on your team? You're like, people asking to be on your team. That is a sign that what you're doing is working, because people are talking about it.
Yes. Okay. So as a people matter expert, Olu, how can that approach reshape how we define success in business? I feel like that's such a big question, but I know you got it.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I understand is values are incredibly important, right? Because values inform how you make difficult decisions. That's it, right? One of the ways in which we can change business based upon people matter expertise is, I remember reading this article that came out from the Gallup organization. It first came out, I think, in 2008. It was republished in like 2020. And the name of the article was "What Followers Want from Leaders," right? What followers want from leaders. And it came down to 4 things that they wanted. They wanted trust, they wanted compassion, they wanted stability, and they wanted hope. Trust, compassion, stability, hope. Notice having all the answers isn't in there, right? And if you notice, those 4 things are all things that we can do as a human that doesn't require a certification, a master's degree, a college degree, anything. You can create, build trust. You can show compassion. You can provide stability, which might mean that you don't have the answers, but you're still showing up as a person who has a steady hand on the till. How can you adapt and show people it's okay to adapt? And most important of all is they need to have hope. You have to model it and say, you know what? I'm acknowledging it's rough right now, but I think it's going to get better. And I'm willing to put in the work if you are too. When you operate as a people matter expert, and that is your value is in creating that environment, then what happens as a result of that, it can literally change businesses as they exist. And I think one of the best ways in order to do that and to approach it is through the advent of a little piece of leadership technology called storytelling. And
Mhm.
if you imagine the story that you would like to tell about yourself as a leader, your team as a leader of your team, your organization, your division, your department, think about a desired and preferred future that you want to be able to walk into. Dare to write and compose that story, which I would imagine includes bringing people along with you and making sure that you are focused on the development of your people in every aspect and the consideration of your people in every aspect. Then you will succeed in creating the conditions where people they can say, people matter on this team. I matter on this team because my leader has shown it through not only their words, but through their actions. And for that, I'm so happy that I'm spending half of my life, my waking hours here.
Now, Olu, you are executive coach and a people matter expert. You have been doing this for several years at this point. What is your intention in this space?
My intention, I can't talk about it without talking about my purpose and my gifting. I want to help human beings realize that they're human becomings, and I want to help them facilitate that growth. I want to be a person who helps to facilitate breakthrough in myself. I have to leave myself first,
Mhm.
and in others. I have had people pour into my life and tell me things that when you first hear them, if you're not in the right headspace or heart space, might feel arrogant. But I want to have a global impact in what it is that I want to do. Um, I want to become a best-selling author, which means I need to, stop letting fear masquerade as wisdom and actually put this pen to paper and make it happen. I want to be seen as a global leadership expert. I want to be invited in people's homes that might look like a television show or even a Netflix special. Hey, Netflix,
Right.
or whatever that looks like. I want to, above all, when my time on this earth ends, I want to be empty. I want to have given everything that is within me. I want it to come out. I want to leave a legacy for my two children and my wife and my family, my friends. And I want to do that by continuing to honor the gift, the God-given gift that I've been given, with people and with words. And so I know that's large, and it may not necessarily have materialized or crystallized into like actual like endpoints, but that might necessarily be an indication that I'm trying to remain open and not limit myself to what is possible. So I just want to be an instrument and be a vessel, and leave this earth better than I found it.
You know what, Olu? My pastor, I'm a Christian. My pastor,
Same.
Robert D. Walker, says this all the time. And when you were speaking about your intention, it reminded me of this. He says, I never want to die and go to heaven. And God says, this is the room where you got whatever you got while you were on earth. But this is the room you could have gotten
Mm,
while you were on earth. And when you said, when I leave here, I want to be empty, I thought of that visual.
yeah,
Could you imagine going to heaven? And this is if you believe in heaven,
which I do.
that you get there and
Mm,
God says, this is everything you did, Olu, while you were on earth. And then he shows you another room where it's completely empty. There is nothing left that you could have possibly done while you were on earth. That would be amazing. And that is what I want for
yeah,
you. That is what I want for you. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
that would be a life well lived. I'm a Christian as
Yes,
well, and
yes,
my father was a chaplain, and so he instilled that in me since I was a kid, and I think that is the ultimate measure of whether I did what I was supposed to do with this brief amount of time that I'm here, and I
yes.
that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would be. Okay, Olu, my last question for you. Who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
Oh, absolutely. And I was contemplating this question because there are a couple of people that I think would be amazing. But I think the one who is rising highest on my list in this moment is a good friend and fellow speaker. She's a communications coach. And even though she has my same last name, we are not related. But we call each other sibling cousins. Her name is Shahara Burrell, and she recently married a gentleman named Jason, who he and I have the same last name. So we were already calling each other
Yes.
cousins for years, and that we've worked together. And now we call each other sibling cousins, and so she's would be dynamic, and I think she has so much to offer and share. So I would be incredibly grateful to connect you with her, to have her on a future episode of the Crystal Petrie podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olu. This has been such an immediate learning experience for me. Like I was actively learning as you were talking. It was amazing. And I don't know if like people could see it in my face because, I have one of those faces like I don't hide what I'm thinking. It was amazing. Oh
Thank you.
my God, you are amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you
being
so much.
on this podcast. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you also for the gift of your feedback, because I really want to, again, I want to pour out whatever I got, not hold anything back. And so I appreciate the gifting of your platform to allow me to be able to do that. And I hope that your listeners and your watchers get a lot from this, and it challenges them to further leaning to their gifts, and to also seek to be empty when they reach the end of their life as well.
Absolutely. And to my community, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get Olu's podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.